Canada holds something the United States cannot easily replace, and that gives Ottawa a powerful hand in the trade fight. While Washington tries to put pressure on Canada, one critical resource is quietly turning the tables. American farmers may be the ones who pay the price. Washington built one of the largest tariff walls in modern history against Canada, and then quietly carved a hole in it. That hole is potash. Canada is the world's largest potash exporter, and more than half of what it ships goes straight to American farms. When the United States exempted Canadian potash from its 50% tariffs, it revealed something Washington did not want exposed, that when it comes to fertilizer, America simply cannot afford to lose Canada. The scale of Canada's dominance is the foundation of the entire story. Canada is the world's largest potash exporter, sending roughly 22.9 million tons overseas in 2024. More than half of those exports went to the United States. American farmers depend heavily on Canadian potash to keep their crops growing and their fertilizer costs under control. That dependency is not a marginal feature of American agriculture, it is structural. The Corn Belt, the wheat fields, the soybean acres that feed both American consumers and export markets all run on potassium, and most of that potassium comes from Saskatchewan. The exemption is the announcement that exposed the weakness. When the Trump administration constructed its sweeping tariffs on Canadian goods, 50% duties covering wine, cement, furniture, and a long list of products, it specifically carved out potash. That decision speaks volumes. Washington was willing to tax nearly everything Canada sends south, but when it reached fertilizer, it flinched. The exemption is an open admission that the United States has far fewer options on potash than on almost any other Canadian import. A government confident it could replace Canadian potash would have taxed it like everything else. Instead, it protected its own farmers by leaving the potash flowing. The reason America has so few options comes down to geology and geopolitics. The alternatives to Canadian potash are Russia and Belarus, the next largest producers in the world. But both operate under the shadow of Western sanctions and geopolitical complications following the invasion of Ukraine. Belarusian potash faces sanctions, and Russian commodity exports face banking restrictions and political risk. Neither can serve as a stable, reliable replacement for Canadian supply. And building enough new American domestic potash production to fill the gap would take many years and billions in capital, because developing a new potash mine is a decade-long undertaking. There is no quick substitute for Saskatchewan. That combination puts Canada in an extraordinarily powerful position. If Canadian potash exports were suddenly disrupted, American farmers would face higher fertilizer prices, tighter supplies, and dramatically bigger costs. The leverage is not theoretical. Even the mere threat of new tariffs earlier in the trade conflict pushed fertilizer markets higher, demonstrating how quickly this issue reaches American farms. Reuters documented in March 2025 that both American and Canadian farmers face soaring fertilizer prices amid the trade war, showing that even the possibility of disruption moves prices before any actual supply. Interruption occurs. The early history of the trade conflict already proved how sensitive this pressure point is. When the Trump administration first imposed its initial 25% tariff on Canadian goods in early 2025, potash was included. Within days, American farm organizations objected forcefully, and the administration reduced the potash tariff from 25% to 10% through a separate executive order within roughly a week. That rapid partial reversal is the most revealing episode in the entire potash story. Washington imposed a full tariff, faced immediate blowback from its own agricultural base, and retreated almost instantly. It learned the lesson early. You cannot tax the fertilizer your own farmers depend on without paying a political price at home. And if you want the real story behind how Canada is still holding its ground through tariffs, wars, and hard times, hit join below to join the membership for exclusive documentaries you won't see anywhere else about Canada's progress and rise through uncertainty. The pricing mechanics show exactly how the pain would land. Before the tariff threats emerged, potash traded at roughly $450 per ton. Full pass-through of a 25% tariff could have raised prices by more than $100 per ton on Canadian-sourced supply. American farmers consume approximately 5.3 million metric tons of potash annually. At $100 per ton of additional cost, the aggregate hit to American agriculture approaches $530 million a year. Those costs do not stay on the farm. They flow into the price of corn, soybeans, and wheat, and eventually into the grocery prices American consumers pay. A disruption to Canadian potash is not just a farm problem. It is a food price problem. The crop dependency is what converts a fertilizer cost into a national food security concern. Potassium is one of the 3 primary macronutrients that commercial crop production requires. A farmer cannot skip it in a year of high prices without accepting lower yields, because nutrient deficiency produces predictable declines in output. So American farmers face a hard choice: either pay the higher price or accept reduced harvests. Reduced harvests on the same planted acreage mean upward pressure on the price of everything those crops become. There is no way to opt out of potassium, which is exactly why the leverage is so absolute. Canadian officials have long recognized potash as one of the country's most powerful bargaining tools. Ontario Premier Doug Ford named potash alongside electricity and oil when describing Canada's economic leverage, stating that the United States is Canada's #1 customer in the world, and that Washington needs to feel the pain rather than Canada constantly absorbing it. Saskatchewan Premier Scott Moe has also raised the possibility of export measures on the province's resources. The provinces that control potash production have made clear they understand the weapon they hold, even as the minerals continue to flow south. The parliamentary research on potash and the Canada-U.S. trade relationship laid out why this dependency is so difficult for Washington to escape. The United States relies on imports for the vast majority of its potassium consumption, and Canada is overwhelmingly its largest supplier. The physical supply chain, the rail lines, the blending facilities, the storage terminals, the application equipment has been built around Canadian potash for decades. Disrupting that chain would require rebuilding logistics infrastructure, not simply finding a new supplier. The integration runs so deep that even a willing alternative source could not be substituted quickly. The planting calendar sharpens the vulnerability. Potash for spring corn and soybean planting is typically purchased and delivered months in advance. A farmer making purchasing decisions under tariff uncertainty pays a risk premium even before any tariff is finalized, because supply contracts signed under uncertainty carry hedging costs. Every time the trade conflict flares, that uncertainty premium works its way into fertilizer prices across the American farm belt, raising costs for farmers who have no choice but to buy. Canada's dominance is not a temporary condition, it is expanding. Saskatchewan holds the world's largest potash reserves, and BHP's massive Jansen mine is adding millions of tons of new annual capacity. Canadian producers are simultaneously deepening export relationships with Brazil, India, China, and Southeast Asia markets that provide alternatives to the American buyer if the trade relationship deteriorates further. American farmers depend on a supply source that is growing its production, diversifying its customer base, and facing tariff measures that have produced no new American mining capacity to reduce that dependence. The exemption is the whole story in a single decision. America built a huge tariff wall and had to leave a hole in it for Canadian fertilizer. Canada does not need to threaten the United States directly. The numbers already show the leverage. More than half of Canada's 22.9 million tons of potash exports flow to a country that cannot replace them without turning to sanctioned suppliers or waiting a decade for new mines. One disruption in Saskatchewan could send shockwaves through American agriculture and ripple across the global fertilizer market. Washington knows it. That is why, of all the Canadian goods it was willing to tax, potash was the one it could not afford to touch.